Back to Normality, Chapter 47 to 50. There was no great September of Baylor in King's Landing yet, and whilst the September that would eventually be forged into such by the eponymous ruler was there, it was nowhere near grand or great enough to draw much of the nobility. So any self-respecting worshipper of the Seven in King's Landing with access to the Red Keep would usually simply attend services there. After all, going to the September on Visanyas Hill was tantamount to admitting you couldn't get into the September at the Red Keep. Which was precisely why I was not allowed to get out of it. So every seventh day, I would take a seat between Laner and my father and listen to Eustace drone on. He wasn't a very good speaker. He had a tendency to get stuck in loops, repeating his point endlessly until even the most devout and true followers were squirming with boredom. He was also annoyingly conservative, and I had never forgiven him for preventing Viserys from having Daemon executed in the aftermath of that night. No man is more accursed than the kinslayer my arse. Daemon would have killed Viserys in a heartbeat, and you know it. Daemon who, annoyingly, still was not dead. Losing men, ships and islands at a truly astounding rate, but still very much alive. Alive and desperate. An animal was at its most dangerous when cornered. It felt like everyone was holding their breath and waiting to see where the chips would fall. At least Eustace had the good sense to keep his head down and keep his nose out of politics. I had no doubt he was firmly in Aegon's camp, despite the seven-pointed star saying nothing about succession issues, and was probably already creating a narrative that cast me as the villain. Don't think I've forgotten it was you who made up the only details that have ever cast original Aegon in a sympathetic light, Eustace, because I haven't. I'm out of sorts and taking it out on a man that no longer exists. After my bleedings were over, Laner and I had gone right back to trying. Every other night he would present himself in my room, we'd both engage in acts that left us feeling thoroughly humiliated and then curl up together and try and forget that our pride was in tatters. Every morning I would get up, scrub myself clean and go about my day. Still nothing. My next bleeding had come, lighter than usual and gone much faster. I'd gone into such a rage over it that only Lena had braved being near me. She'd relayed Joffrey's tantrum lecture 3 times before I'd felt sufficiently enough like a child to stop. Lena, who only seemed to grow more beautiful with every passing week. Lena, whose growing belly seemed to mock the lack of my own. Lena, who watched me with such intensity whenever she thought I was not looking. I couldn't decide if I should slap her or kiss her and get the inevitable broken nose that would likely follow over and done with. Then Lord Gerald had presented himself to me. He was expecting his first grandchild and would be returning to the Vale as soon as Jane sent him his replacement, as the Linderley girl his son had married was close to confinement and he did not want to risk missing it. I'd known it coming, he'd been saying so since my name day celebration, but an actual set date of his departure hurt all over again. Jane still wouldn't tell me who she was sending in replacement. Still angry, I had brought up the marriage business. We'll see if she remains angry when I start my procession and turn up with 4 fire-breathing dragons and a meaningful look. I need to calm down. I do. It feels like I'm on edge. I've had an entire month of peace where things have been going well. This is normally where something terrible happens, like more war in the Vale or Daemon popping up and setting fire to something I like. I tuned in to catch the end of Eustace's rant, sermon about not honoring the Seven in all aspects of your life and only when you visit the September. Then Viserys took my hand and I took Laner's and we all sang a final hymn to the Father and were finally free to disperse. Your Grace, may I speak to you for a moment? Or not? I turned to face Eustace with a smile on my face and sent Laner on ahead. Laner was not Eustace's favorite person, and the Septon often liked to deliver nasty little barbs disguised as the wisdom of the Seven. I think it genuinely upset Laner to some degree in ways the normal attacks did not. Of course, Septon, I always have time for servants of the Seven. May I praise you on the excellent and well thought out sermon you delivered today? Oh. Well, thank you, Your Grace, he stammered, taken aback by the false warmth in my tone. I have not noticed you in the September much recently. My own prayers have been to the Mother. I have found peace in doing so more privately, I lied. He nodded thoughtfully at that. Well, I shall certainly pray to the Mother on your behalf as well, he lied right back. But on the topic of the Mother, I wish to speak to you regarding these midwives. Ah. Certainly, Septon Eustace. I'm rather excited about them myself. His smile flickered. I has expected some groups to react badly, of course, but the Faith being the first to voice objections was a surprise. I'd have thought the Maesters would have been the first. I do wonder if these women are truly appropriate, he began. I let my face show confusion, a perfectly sculpted expression that I'd been told made me look like a brainless idiot. perfect for throwing people off of their train of thought. How so, Septon? I watched as he tried to formulate his argument. The 7-pointed star and the faith in general had no original sin moment. No one thing to point to in the textbooks and say, this is why women suffer in childbirth. In fact, the act of childbirth was supposed to be considered as valuable as the act of knighting. The pain of childbirth is a sacred thing. Sacred to the mother. Is it really appropriate to bring these devices and potions into the matter? He asked finally. The natural pain of birthing is the duty of the woman as the bleeding on the battlefield is the duty of the man. The raising of children is the duty of the woman as the burden of ruling wisely is the duty of the man. Wow. Forgive me, Septon Eustace, but I do not see where in the 7-pointed star that such a thing is written. He tilted his head back, nostrils flaring. That there must be pain. Only that it is a woman's duty to bear the babes. A woman's duty to raise them. A woman's duty to guide them. As equal in importance as the man's duties. That is not precisely true, he said finally, through gritted teeth. Haha, nice try, but I'd driven old Septon Victor half mad asking questions about the faith. Be that as it may, there are still those who believe dulling the pain of birth is unnatural. The mother granted women that pain so that you might better know the joy of your babes. Surely it is a matter of using the gifts the smith has granted us. I replied, trying a different tact. Eustace snorted and turned to the statue of said smith. Surely one might argue that 2 men in armor hitting each other with swords is unnatural. After all, we are hardly born with blades and plate. Instead, the smith gave us the secret of steel so that we would be better able to follow the warrior. Surely this is using gifts the smith gave us so that we might better honor the mother. He was silent for a long time and then his mouth twisted in annoyance. No doubt I'd find street septons preaching against the midwives anyway. Unluckily for him, those street septons were going to get torn apart. My midwives were very popular for obvious reasons. Obvious reasons being that most people, surprisingly, didn't like losing the women they loved in the birthing bed or losing children to entirely preventable causes. Combine that with them openly working with Maria's many charities and, well, anyone saying a bad word against them would not be preaching to the choir, let's put it that way. In King's Landing anyway, I reminded myself. I could be as smug as I liked that Septon Eustace wouldn't be able to smear me in the capital. He could still have me smeared everywhere else. He was the High Septon's creature in truth, unlikely to bring an opinion to the table he hadn't been told to. If the High Septon did dislike my midwives and this wasn't just Eustace interpreting his orders creatively, I could be about to have every Septon from Old Town to the twins bad-mouthing me to whoever would listen. The worst part is, I had no real way to stop them. No in with the faith. I certainly couldn't order every Septon that said a bad word regarding myself to the death. I'd be mager with teats again and all my hard PR work would have been for nothing. Fine, Maria's PR work. How much of this was Allison's doing? Laner was still there when I got out, looking worried. After he checked I was okay, we mounted horses and rode to his father's manse in near silence. He'd gotten good at telling when I was worrying over something and when I wanted to vent or not. Right now, I wanted to speak with Joffrey. Joffrey, whose grip on the 7 kingdoms only seemed to tighten with each passing day. Joffrey, who sometimes seemed to know what I was thinking before I'd even thought it. Joffrey, who loved his silver prince and would die to put his children on the throne. The Valerian manse was starting to become a little bit like home. It felt welcoming, even if I did run the risk of Corlys hovering and whining about heirs. Rhaenys had clearly been here a while. She was dozing on one of the seats, bare feet roasting before the fire and her boots strewn across Corlys' prized carpet. She still had not totally forgiven her husband, but things were thawing once more. As for her children, I could not tell. She seemed warm with them, but when she was alone she was given to melancholy, or so Joffrey reported. She spent most her time at Driftmark, separate from them all, managing its rebuilding. Not for the first time I wondered what she would have been like as queen. Would she have been kind, wise and fierce? Or would have spent her reign battling against men who thought they knew better? Becoming slowly more embittered until she resembled nothing more than Canon Rhaenyra. Would she have taken Laenor and Lena any better as queen? I have no doubt she'd have married the two, which was an odd thought. I'd heard whispers that she'd wanted them to marry after Viserys had married Alicent. I never thought I'd think this, but I'm glad Corlys won that argument. Speaking of her children, across from her was her daughter, hands stroking across her enlarged belly and looking completely enraptured by the flames. I felt myself tension drain from my shoulders at how domestic it all seemed as we both entered. They stirred in response. I thought you would arrive with Lena and Joffrey, asked Rhaenys, stretching and yawning. Rhaenyra had to speak to Septon Eustace and now she's angry, Laenor told her as he bent down and suffered a kiss on the cheek from his mother. Leave the Septons to their preaching. It's a bad idea to get too involved with the faith. At least Viserys will be back at the keep now. Huh? Why did she want to see Viserys? What happened now? Came Joffrey's wry voice from behind me as he slipped in, having clearly just been changing into his more comfortable workwear. Nothing. Just Eustace sticking his nose where it does not belong, he sighed and rubbed at his eyes. He questioned me about the midwives. I'm worried it may be the start of interference from the faith. That does not bode well for when we begin rolling out other changes, he stated, unhappily. Laenor pulled him into the couch next to him and drew him in for a tired hug. Attending the September with Eustace left everyone the same. Strangely lethargic. Maybe it was the secret power of the faith, the ability to dull even the sharpest mind. If they have any sense they'll stay out of it, growled Rhaenys. Stick to their preaching. They're Hightower men. The most devout at the moment are nearly half-reach man, Joffrey replied, then muttered almost to himself. This is too much. How is she doing this? What? Asked Laenor. Joffrey gave us all a stricken look, and for the first time I noted he was hardly his usual cool and composed self. He looked stressed and tired. You know, I established businesses in King's Landing. When I first started it was easy, too easy I thought. Laenor and I nodded along as Joffrey ran an agitated hand through his short-cropped hair. Then someone began tracking me. Playing with me almost, a dance. They stepped forward, I respond, and they stepped back. I was having to respond to them, and now there's someone else. They're different to the first, less playful. This one is directly attacking me. I'm having to diversify to a greater degree. I don't know if I can deal with them and the faith. He looked miserable and I felt sorry for him. He'd hardly been trained for the role of spymaster, he'd been making it up as he went along. Before I could reassure, Lena spoke up. Another player, she mused, surprising us all. Daemon? That made sense, and if it were Daemon there was only one candidate for his hand in all this. Miseria. Miseria was dangerous. Dangerous and willing to slaughter any who stood in her path. She'd done as much to Hightower men when she'd been a dancing whore and they servants of the hand of the king. What would she do if Daemon let her off the leash? Miseria, Joffrey repeated slowly. Connections forged themselves in my mind. Miseria. Damn that whore, no wonder he still lives, if she is still dragging his worthless carcass out of trouble. And then Lena surprised us all again. If this Miseria is Daemon's and Joffrey is yours, she started carefully. Who is Alicent's? And caught up. I try to do 1 chapter a day. So far that's going well, but be aware that it could drop off in the future when uni picks up. There was no sign of the sun, I noted mournfully, as I pulled on my riding clothes. Even on a normal day I would not rise until after the sun, even if I did rise earlier than most. I groaned as my fingers refused to pull the laces of the breeches properly and cast another longing look at the bed. Across from me, Laenor pulled his shirt over his head, looking just as tired as I was. We'd been invited to stay in the manse the night before. By invited, I meant told point blank by Rhaenys that we'd be staying so that she could ensure we'd rise before dawn the next day. Today was apparently what she'd been badgering Viserys about. Whatever it was, he'd agreed readily, which was always a worrying thought. Viserys and Rhaenys agreeing on things did not happen often. I wasn't sure what was going on with those two. She definitely approved of his shiny new backbone, but she hadn't been appreciative of his almost but not quite hostility to her family. Viserys saw her children as seahorses, she saw them as dragons. He saw them as just another faction and she saw them as moving to their rightful places in life. Did she resent him for sitting on her throne or just the fact he was doing such an awful job of it? Oh, and there was the fact her and Alicent were only ever 2 seconds away from gutting each other at any given time. Her sparse visits to the keep were an endless source of stress for Viserys, moving the two women around so they might never meet by accident. Alicent may enjoy baiting Rhaenys about her lost title, her children and her husband, but Rhaenys was probably the only person who could get away with physical violence in turn, something Viserys knew well and was eager to avoid because Rhaenys was also the only person who would break Alicent's nose if pushed too far. It was with leaden feet that I trundled downstairs, Laenor at my back. Both of us were yawning frequently and so widely that my jaw was beginning to hurt, and from the way he rubbed at his face his jaw ached just as fiercely. Bleg, curse morning people. Actually, this wasn't even morning. Rhaenys was waiting for us, eyes bright and alert. Her daughter was in a similar state of awake to us though. Surely Syrax, Vagor and Sea Smoke could overwhelm malaise and let us all go back to the glorious land of sleep. Ah! There you two are, thought I'd have to get one of the servants to drench you through to get you rise. Rhaenys said, smiling widely. Sadist. She was enjoying our misery. I dropped into a chair and briefly entertained the thought of laying my head on the table for 5 blessed minutes. Laner, saint of a man he was, poured us both some juice and slid the full cup towards me. Rhaenys cackled at our subdued manner. Eat up, you'll need a good hearty meal to get you through today. What is today? Laner asked, grabbing at the various items strewn about the table. This business with dragons got Viserys and I talking. You three have never received any real military training on Dragonback. Hell, Rhaenyra and Lena do not have in martial training whatsoever. That's not true, I can use a bow, I mumbled, pillaging some pear from the bowl of fruit. Rhaenys gave me a speculative look as I bit into it, and then immediately spat it back out. This is awful. Who did you buy these from? Not my job to buy the fruit. Corlys is probably trying to cut costs again, I'll tell him to switch back. I didn't know you could shoot. Have you tried from Dragonback? Rhaenys asked. I dropped the slice of pear and opted for something safe, like bacon. Much better. No, I said, in between mouthfuls of delicious bacon. In truth even Helena is better than me but Ser Langward is a slave driver. I'm better than average. Might be something to work on, mused Rhaenys as she washed her own breakfast down with some sort of fruit tea. Lena, feel like learning to use the bow. The girl in question looked at her swollen stomach doubtfully. She was still over a month off her due date but earlier births had happened. I doubted she'd been eager to fly today, not even Gerardis had been eager to have her flying around but Rhaenys had insisted that a dragon rider could not be denied the sky. Apparently she'd been flying with Lena until the moment she'd taken her chamber. I doubt I'm in the state for it mother, she said dryly, a rueful smile on her face. I meant afterwards, dear daughter. If this whole business does end in war, well, even if it does not you must be able to train your children in how to deploy a dragon in battle. It is not a simple matter of pointing the front of it at the enemy and letting nature take its course. I joked. Rhaenys snorted. You joke, but if you do it that way eventually you'll be shot down. You only need look at my namesake for that lesson. I blinked at that. She was no warrior and, without Visenya and Aegon by her side, in no rush to use proper tactics. A true attack on a castle should leave no opening for a scorpion to come anywhere near the dragon's face. And what is the proper way? I asked, genuinely curious. The queen who never was, and how she hated that nickname and little shit who'd given it to her, placed her empty cup on the table and smiled. You've studied the conquest? I nodded. Aegon's attack on Harrenhal is how you are supposed to attack a fortified position with a dragon. By flying as high he did and diving he rendered their heavy siege weaponry useless. Rhaenys flew straight at the walls of Hellholt. The shot may have been a lucky one but she still put herself needlessly at risk. If I ever attacked a castle with Syrax I would definitely keep that in mind. After we had all finished up we took a ride to the dragon pit and retrieved our mounts. Syrax seemed as unhappy as I was to be woken so early but at least she got to sleep until after the sun had risen. We followed Malay's information. Laner and I behind her and Lena behind us, forming a diamond shape. She took us to a stretch of deserted beach and signaled for us to land. She was taking this very seriously. I knew why, of course, she was dancing round it but the only reason we hadn't trounced Daemon yet was because only Rhaenys had any hope of matching him. Laner and I may have seen battle but that had been against foot soldiers. Lena's only claim to battle had been flying in defense of Bloodstone against the 1 or 2 ships that slipped through the net and attempted to hit the harbor. I hope that woke everyone up. Rhaenys called as we moved in close. Now. First lesson. Lena, what's Vagor's greatest weakness? I risked a glance at the massive beast, scarred from her various fights. The biggest living dragon. It was hard to believe she had any weakness whatsoever. Her speed. Even Syrax, the youngest dragon here, can outfly her, Lena answered quickly. Rhaenys snorted but did not indicate either way if Lena was right. How would you fight a dragon like Syrax, she asked. Lena gave me a hesitant look. I would use Vagor's armor to my advantage. Bring her in close and beat her with strength, she said. Rhaenys nodded once but she didn't seem all that happy with the answer. I saw Lena hesitate, trying to figure out what she'd said wrong. Make note Renera, Syrax is fast but one blow, true or glancing, from a dragon like Vagor will knock her out of the air. How would you fight Vagor? Feeling vaguely like I should be actually taking notes, I forced myself to consider the giant beast as a possible enemy. Aim at the rider. I finally guessed, not seeing how Syrax could ever beat Vagor alone. Rainy smiled broadly in response. Excellent. If I've told you to once I've told you 1,000 times. A dragon's greatest weakness is its rider. Laner and Lena both looked down at their feet, almost perfectly in sync with one another, and I covered my laugh with a cough. Rhaenys pursed her lips looking at them both. A rider cannot survive dragon fire. A rider does not have the instincts of a dragon. A dragon will follow its rider's commands even if it does not believe them the best course of action. Scare or kill the rider and the dragon will be useless. When none of us answered, she gently rapped her son on the head with her knuckles. I would not know what to do if anything happened to you that I could have prevented. Any of you. We might have had difficulties, but you are my children. Not even the stranger himself will take you from me, she whispered. And that goes for you too, Renera. I swallowed, throat tight. In another world she'd outlived both of her children. Lost one to childbirth and one to murder. Had she really been reckless in that fight with Aemond and Aegon? Trapped in a cunning ambush? It was a cruel thing to outlive a child, never mind 2 of them. Now, since I have grilled the girls, it's time for you, my son. Laner groaned. Malaise and Syrax, Vagor and Sea Smoke, explain the difference. Malaise and Syrax are pit dragons. They're smaller and pack less of a punch, but they're faster and more maneuverable in a fight. Sea Smoke and Vagor are not pit bred. They rely on sheer power and thick armor, he explained, looking relieved when his mother nodded along with him. I had known that at least. Good. When we get to the practice side of things, I'll be pitting Syrax against Sea Smoke and Malaise against Vagor in the first half. Then we'll switch. Sea Smoke versus Vagor and Syrax versus Malaise. Ouch, that matchup. I was well aware I was the least skilled rider here. Actually, until Aegon and Helena had tamed Frost and Morgul, I had been the least talented rider in Westeros. Behind even Laner, who wasn't that far behind Lena in skill. I wasn't sure if Daemon could outfly Lena, but Rhaenys was the most talented without question when it came to the technicalities. In a fight they would be much more evenly matched, I had been assured, but I did wonder how much of that was, well, assuming Rhaenys worse in a fight because she was a woman. Rhaenys' lecture dragged on until the sun was high in the sky as she went over the different maneuvers and tricks a dragon could use to defeat one bigger than it or faster than it. She warned us about fighting from a grounded dragon and promised to teach us what she knew about doing so in case the worst came to the worst. What made my heart hurt most was when she taught us how to escape from a fight you did not want to be in. I think Laner understood too, if the look he gave me was any indication. Finally, after a small picnic, she let us mount up once more and take to the sky, running us through different exercises and commenting on how sloppy we all were. It took me back to the days I'd have her teach me just for the pleasure of getting away from Daemon. Razor sharp tongue and all. It was interesting to note that both Lena and Laner used the whip much less sparingly than Rhaenys and I. More differences between the types of dragons, I supposed. I did well enough against Sea Smoke and at least managed to avoid a complete humiliation. It was still clear that I had a lot to learn. I died way too many times for comfort. Even if Daemon dropped dead tomorrow and never brought war to Westeros, there was still the dance. I had over a decade to make sure I was good enough. The less said about my aerial duels with Malaise the better. Rhaenys stomped me into the dirt and she stomped me into the dirt hard. At least I could take solace in the fact that a heavily pregnant Lena was still coming out victorious more often than not against her brother. The sun was setting when Rhaenys called a halt to our training and we landed once more on the beach. My stomach was grumbling loudly when we crowded in close. Good work. This is going to be a regular thing. I want to work out new maneuvers with you and perfect old ones. I also want you to get some experience in with night flying. Renera, we'll work on your bow somehow. Ranged attack from dragon back will be useful. And both of you girls will be getting fitted for armor. Lena just sighed at the tone that brooked no argument. I found myself quite excited. I'd always wanted to wear armor and yet had never been able to justify it. My status as princess only went so far, apparently, and it stopped at anything not Princess Y. Despite that, I was extremely grateful to finally fall into bed. We'd elected to all head back to the manse even though, technically, I was supposed to be at the Red Keep whenever possible. part of Viserys cracked down. Oh well, if he complained I'd set Rhaenys on him. That would teach him. If Jane thinks she's not getting an earful about this, she is sorely mistaken, I muttered as we waited at the dockside for Lord Gerald's replacement. Beside me Laenor rubbed my arm soothingly but said nothing. I'm grouchy, sue me. I'd woken up feeling like death, warmed over and cursing Jaehaerys for his propaganda that Targaryens never got ill because I was feeling particularly awful. The rotting, fetid mess that masqueraded as sea water was not helping, it was sending my gut squirming and my throat turning with nausea. If I find out Alicent messed with my hygiene training again and I've got food poisoning, I don't care what Viserys says, I'm strangling her and having done with it. Ugh. Please let me get through this hello ceremony without vomiting on the Vale's new representative. Please. Although if it's gone Corbray, I'll reconsider. The Aaron ship docked and it felt like time was a crawl as though they prepared to disembark everyone and unload the cargo it had brought. My heart leapt to my throat as Rhea Royce picked her way down the gangplank and made her way towards us. She looked as sick as I felt, but she at least had the excuse of the sea not agreeing with her. I made my way over, carefully, and wrapped my arms about her shoulders, sinking into the embrace. Aunt Rhea. It is good to see you, I mumbled, voice further muffled but the fabric of her dress. Her hand rubbed my back soothingly and then she pulled away, eyeing me critically. And it is good to see you too, niece, but she broke off and glanced about at the small crowd, and Maris Grafton, on the dock before shaking her head. Come, show me to the Red Keep. I think you and I need to have a word or two. The litter ride was unpleasant. Very unpleasant, but Laenor kept up an endless stream of chatter the entire way and it did somewhat work by keeping my mind off of it. At least until we got to the Red Keep and Rhea paused just too long when greeting Lena. I winced as Lena did the world's worst job at keeping the mortification off of her face, further tipping off my incredibly perceptive aunt that the rumors surrounding this betting were probably true. Shit. 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 Why is my head so foggy? I could have sent Laenor ahead on a horse, he hated the litter anyway, and gotten Lena out of sight. Once we were all seated, Rhea cast a critical eye over me once more before pursing her lips. You look awful. I only narrowly avoided snorting juice. Why does she always wait until I'm drinking to spring these things on me? She's been peaky for the past couple of days. She refused to see Melas though, Laenor explained, and Rhea raised an eyebrow of accusation. Do you not remember what I said about not being invincible? She asked archly, and I flushed, before mumbling an apology. I wasn't going to tell her it was her own damn castle that had made me ill last time. Although given what happened last time you saw a Grand Maester. I held my hand up at the reminder. Her lips thinned. She was likely another person sending an endless stream of assassins after Daemon. If he died, she could remarry without having to jump through hoops for an annulment. That he still wasn't dead after all this time was galling. Lena offered to bring Maester Gerardis from Dragonstone. If she continues to be like this, I'll send my sister regardless of Rhaenyra's opinion, Laenor assured her as if I wasn't sitting right next to him. Rhea shrugged and took a drink of her wine. Speaking of which, there was an edge to her voice that I did not like. It made my teeth itch. I was genuinely fond of her, she was my aunt, but she's a married woman. And then cursed myself because I was a stupid idiot who'd just given the entire game away with one protest. So it's true. Alicent wrote to me to inform me of what she'd done. Fuck that woman. Seriously. Alicent wants you to expose her, said Laenor as my brain promptly presented me with zero ideas to escape this problem. Daemon is poison right now, if you expose Lena. I have a mind too. Upon seeing my stricken expression, she rolled her eyes and sighed, looking suddenly tired. I knew what Daemon was like long before you, niece, and I do recall owing Alicent payback. Do you truly not care it's his bastard she carries? It's her child too. It'll be Joffrey's as well. Joffrey will raise the babe to be good and kind and clever, and Daemon will get nothing. He won't even know Daemon is his father, I said. Oh. Too good. She laughed. A child of his precious blood will be raised by a mere Undul. He'll call a mere Undul father. Oh yeah, Rhea was really spiteful when she wanted to be. You must allow me to shower your sister's child with gifts, Ser Laenor. I want him to know I know. I want to know he's sitting on those rocks, surrounded by murderers and rapists, with the knowledge his bronze bitch sees more of his son than he ever will. Laenor merely smiled in a smug manner and sat back. That can be arranged. Please do accept my deepest apologies for the way my sister behaved, however. Ria wiped a few tears of mirth from her eyes and sighed. If I demanded apologies from every girl he seduced, I'd drown in a sea of paper. Still, his burning of Spice Town makes much more sense now. I wondered what could drive him to such madness. He has always wanted children, true Valyrian children, mind you. No child of mine would have satisfied him. I'm sorry, Aunt Ria. She gave me a thin smile. Do not weep for me, Rhaenyra, I got a perfectly serviceable niece out of him, she said, smiling gently. It still didn't sit right with me, that she should be so shackled to the man. I resolved to speak with Viserys, surely he wouldn't argue against an annulment now. I rubbed at my face and sighed. Laenor laid a concerned hand on my shoulder and coaxed me into looking at him. Thank you, I said, and he nodded. He understood. He'd saved me a lot of embarrassment and neatly disarmed a trap Alicent must have been sitting on for near a month now. Which meant Alicent must have known Ria was coming. Which meant Jane told her, or maybe Jane told Viserys. This illness is hitting me harder than I thought if my brain is running this slow. Niece, you truly do not look well, said Ria gently, reaching over and placing a cool hand on my forehead. No temperature, not a repeat of before then. Rhaenyra, perhaps you should get some rest. I'll accompany Ria to her introduction at court. It was a testament to the nausea twisting in my guts that I went. My rooms were once again occupied by my ladies, Maris evidently right back to playing the card shark and fleecing her fellows out of their silver if the small pile she'd already acquired was any judge. I staggered past them and Alice rose, catching me by the arm. Your Grace, I think you may require a maester, she said after a moment of studying me. An upset stomach, I think, I replied, before groaning as my stomach tried to turn itself inside out. I'll be fine with some rest. If Jane thinks she's not getting an earful about this, she is sorely mistaken, I muttered as we waited at the dockside for Lord Gerald's replacement. Beside me Laenor rubbed my arm soothingly but said nothing. I'm grouchy, sue me. I'd woken up feeling like death, warmed over and cursing Jaehaerys for his propaganda that Targaryens never got ill because I was feeling particularly awful. The rotting, fetid mess that masqueraded as sea water was not helping, it was sending my gut squirming and my throat turning with nausea. If I find out Alicent messed with my hygiene training again and I've got food poisoning, I don't care what Viserys says, I'm strangling her and having done with it. Ugh. Please let me get through this hello ceremony without vomiting on the Vale's new representative. Please. Although if it's gone Corbray, I'll reconsider. The Aaron ship docked and it felt like time was a crawl as they prepared to disembark everyone and unload the cargo it had brought. My heart leapt to my throat as Rhea Royce picked her way down the gangplank and made her way towards us. She looked as sick as I felt, but she at least had the excuse of the sea not agreeing with her. I made my way over, carefully, and wrapped my arms about her shoulders, sinking into the embrace. Aunt Rhea. It is good to see you, I mumbled, voice further muffled but the fabric of her dress. Her hand rubbed my back soothingly and then she pulled away, eyeing me critically. And it is good to see you too, niece, but she broke off and glanced about at the small crowd, and Maris Grafton, on the dock before shaking her head. Come, show me to the Red Keep. I think you and I need to have a word or two. The litter ride was unpleasant. Very unpleasant, but Laenor kept up an endless stream of chatter the entire way and it did somewhat work by keeping my mind off of it. At least until we got to the Red Keep and Rhea paused just too long when greeting Lena. I winced as Lena did the world's worst job at keeping the mortification off of her face, further tipping off my incredibly perceptive aunt that the rumors surrounding this betting were probably true. Shit. 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 Why is my head so foggy? I could have sent Laenor ahead on a horse, he hated the litter anyway, and gotten Lena out of sight. Once we were all seated, Rhea cast a critical eye over me once more before pursing her lips. You look awful. I only narrowly avoided snorting juice. Why does she always wait until I'm drinking to spring these things on me? She's been peaky for the past couple of days. She refused to see Melas though, Laenor explained, and Rhea raised an eyebrow of accusation. Do you not remember what I said about not being invincible? She asked archly, and I flushed, before mumbling an apology. I wasn't going to tell her it was her own damn castle that had made me ill last time. Although given what happened last time you saw a Grand Maester. I held my hand up at the reminder. Her lips thinned. She was likely another person sending an endless stream of assassins after Daemon. If he died, she could remarry without having to jump through hoops for an annulment. That he still wasn't dead after all this time was galling. Lena offered to bring Maester Gerardis from Dragonstone. If she continues to be like this, I'll send my sister regardless of Renera's opinion, Laner assured her as if I wasn't sitting right next to him. Rhea shrugged and took a drink of her wine. Speaking of which, there was an edge to her voice that I did not like. It made my teeth itch. I was genuinely fond of her, she was my aunt, but she's a married woman. And then cursed myself because I was a stupid idiot who'd just given the entire game away with one protest. So it's true. Alicent wrote to me to inform me of what she'd done. Fuck that woman. Seriously. Alicent wants you to expose her, said Laner as my brain promptly presented me with zero ideas to escape this problem. Daemon is poison right now, if you expose Lena. I have a mind too. Upon seeing my stricken expression she rolled her eyes and sighed, looking suddenly tired. I knew what Daemon was like long before you, niece, and I do recall owing Alicent payback. Do you truly not care it's his bastard she carries? It's her child too. It'll be Joffrey's as well. Joffrey will raise the babe to be good and kind and clever and Daemon will get nothing. He won't even know Daemon is his father, I said. Oh. Too good. She laughed. A child of his precious blood will be raised by a mere undul. He'll call a mere undul father. Oh yeah, Rhea was really spiteful when she wanted to be. You must allow me to shower your sister's child with gifts, Ser Laner. I want him to know I know. I want to know he's sitting on those rocks, surrounded by murderers and rapists, with the knowledge his bronze bitch sees more of his son than he ever will. Laner merely smiled in a smug manner and sat back. That can be arranged. Please do accept my deepest apologies for the way my sister behaved, however. Rhea wiped a few tears of mirth from her eyes and sighed. If I demanded apologies from every girl he seduced I'd drown in a sea of paper. Still, his burning of Spice Town makes much more sense now. I wondered what could drive him to such madness. He has always wanted children, true Valyrian children, mind you. No child of mine would have satisfied him. I'm sorry, Aunt Rhea. She gave me a thin smile. Do not weep for me, Rhaenyra, I got a perfectly serviceable niece out of him, she said, smiling gently. It still didn't sit right with me, that she should be so shackled to the man. I resolved to speak with Viserys, surely he wouldn't argue against an annulment now. I rubbed at my face and sighed. Laner laid a concerned hand on my shoulder and coaxed me into looking at him. Thank you, I said and he nodded. He understood. He'd saved me a lot of embarrassment and neatly disarmed a trap Alicent must have been sitting on for near a month now. Which meant Alicent must have known Rhea was coming. Which meant Jane told her, or maybe Jane told Viserys. This illness is hitting me harder than I thought if my brain is running this slow. Niece, you truly do not look well, said Rhea gently, reaching over and placing a cool hand on my forehead. No temperature, not a repeat of before then. Rhaenyra, perhaps you should get some rest. I'll accompany Rhea to her introduction at court. It was a testament to the nausea twisting in my guts that I went. My rooms were once again occupied by my ladies, Maris evidently right back to playing the card shark and fleecing her fellows out of their silver if the small pile she'd already acquired was any judge. I staggered past them and Alice rose, catching me by the arm. Your Grace, I think you may require a maester, she said after a moment of studying me. An upset stomach, I think, I replied, before groaning as my stomach tried to turn itself inside out. I'll be fine with some rest. I woke up to a storm of nausea and groaned unhappily, pulling myself upright using the headboard. It creaked and groaned at my weight, startling awake Maris, who had been sleeping in a small truckle bed next to my own. Since Girardi's very pleasing, not at all upsetting news, my ladies had not left me alone. Alice and Sarah joked and chattered, determined to stop my brooding. Maria liked to talk about my baby and how it would be such a fine thing to be a mother. Felena had taken refuge in religion, quoting parts of the Mother at me. Even Maris was trying her best, taking care to discover who had irritated me that day and heaping scornful insults upon them in solidarity. Only Lena understood that what I really wanted was to be alone, some peace and quiet to figure out where the hell my life was going, to have my mental breakdown without feeling like I was somehow a failure. That I wanted to weep to myself about the fact that I was pregnant and people knew and there was no escaping it. She'd mastered figuring out if I wanted to be held or not, letting me tire myself out until sleep claimed me. I found myself dreading the day she would leave me, when she would birth her own babe. They'd already stopped her from sleeping at my side. Reactions from elsewhere in the court were more joyful and less considerate. Laner had been almost glowing with pride after the realization. Rainies had flitted into the room and pulled us both into tight hugs of joy, and narrowly avoided being thrown up on in turn. Corlys had arrived later and clapped his son on the shoulder and given me a nod of approval. Which was Corlys for, "I'm so proud I may invent billboards to tell the world how proud I am." Viserys had not stopped singing my praises to anyone who would sit down for more than 5 minutes and listen. He was so happy to have a grandson on the way. Goodness knows what will happen if he gets a granddaughter. Helena had been odd. Happy but distant. Jealous, Alicent had said during the one conversation we'd managed to have civilly. Alicent was not pleased with the news, but she had at least banned Aemond from seeing me, which was something of a mercy. He'd only grown more hateful and angry after Aegon's departure. Speaking of which, he'd sent a letter to Viserys to say he'd arrived and it was nice there. He'd even included a line or two to let me know that there were rooms of gold and they were as cool as they sounded. It gave me hope for our future relationship that he'd remembered my attempt to cheer him and specifically asked after me to boot. "Your Grace, are you well?" asked Maris with a yawn. Nausea made me groan and Maris moved quickly, seizing a chamber pot and laying it out. When I was done she handed me some of Maester Gerardi's concoction he insisted I take after every vomiting spell. It was disgusting and hard to keep down, but he insisted and Alanis had backed him up. As I discovered, that meant serious business. "Do we have much scheduled today?" I asked, as I finished the cup and the urge to expel it had died somewhat. His Grace asked that you present yourself in court if you feel well enough. I glared at the empty cup. My pregnancy had all but halted the faction's various schemes as everyone waited with bated breath as to just what I would produce. A girl and I would be inundated with those wanting a new lady and the prestige of a match with a princess. A son. A son was a different story. If I had a son, various people I will not name may just wet themselves in happiness. As it was, I had other concerns than court. As an expecting mother I was now being frozen out of all levels of governing that Viserys had previously been happy to give me access to. It was frustrating to rely on Corlys to be my representative at small council meetings. I wasn't even showing yet and already he was treating me like an invalid. He said that I had a duty to build my child a household so that we would not be scrambling after the birth. Alicent had agreed and slyly offered her own services that I had politely rejected. I had been unable to dodge his demands. I have a Kingsguard once more, annoyingly, and now I had Stefan Darklyn trailing after me as Kristen Cole once had. Your lady aunt said that she might visit. That was a slightly better option than dealing with my fathead father. Yes, send a message to Lady Rhea please, Maris. We had plenty to discuss. Marriages and Jane Eyre's ongoing stubbornness. Maybe Rhea would be able to tell me just how deep in the shit I was with her. Where are the rest of my ladies today? Felena and Maria are attending to their charities, Lady Lena is with her mother and Alice and Sarah are spending the day with their father and brother. I didn't envy them. I'd die if I had to spend a day with Harwin and his motormouth. A year had not improved him by any real amount. He still watched me with covetous eyes and the announcement of my pregnancy had been like a shot to his heart. If he went the way of Cole I was going to scream. Especially given that the City Watch was his in totality now. A loyal City Watch would be a useful thing to have. What does your Grace desire to break her fast with this morn? Asked Maris. I felt a flicker of guilt. She looked exhausted. All my ladies were exhausted. Spending the night on an already uncomfortable camp bed and then aiding me whenever my stomach decided to go on strike. I'm pretty sure none of them had signed up for this. I tilted my head back to consider Maris' question. Bacon and, fried mushrooms. My appetite had been strange. My customary chilled fruit no longer seemed all that appealing and I hadn't been able to stomach pear in over a month. And a boiled egg. Maris went off to flag down a passing servant and I let myself relax a little and run my hand over my stomach. As far as Gerardis could tell I was not terribly far along, just over a month by his estimate. I'd protested that I'd bled but Alanis had informed me that it happened in some women. In 35 weeks I would have baby. In just 8 months I would have a baby. Not even a year. I'd be 19, barely a month past my name day. Maris' return startled me from my rising panic. Do you wish to dress to break your fast or take it here? She asked, a yawn splitting her face again. Help me get dressed, Maris, then take my bed. I'm sorry to have had you up last night. She shook her head ruefully. I may have cursed Jane Eyre when she sent me to you but never let it be said I shied from duty, she told me. The headache that had threatened earlier was building up behind my eyes. But you found spreading rumors to be acceptable. I snapped and Maris looked at her feet, ashamed. Truly, Your Grace, I was being awful. I had no idea Lady Lena and he were involved. At the look on my face, the words she was going to follow that with died in her throat. I apologize, Your Grace, it was far below what was expected of me as one of your ladies. It will not happen again. When I did not answer her, she made herself busy, fetching my clothing and laying it out for the day. I kept my jaw clenched shut. Maris' idiocy had nearly cost me my alliance with Rhaenys. Who knows who else heard those rumors and believed them. Getting dressed was awkward as Maris desperately tried not to catch my eye, not willing to start the previous argument once more. I'd be sure to have Joffrey turn her life in King's Landing over. If I could have any excuse to send her right back to my pain in the arse of a cousin, I was taking it. Your Grace, your food is here. Maris called. She herself was eating sweetened porridge that made my stomach spin at just the smell. Still, I forced it down and shoveled my own breakfast into my face with less appreciation for table manners than I'd normally give. If it bothered her, she didn't show it. I did note she'd arranged for some ginger tea for me, which did nothing to cool my temper. Ginger was supposed to help settle my stomach, but I found it completely disgusting. I'd told all my ladies 100 times not to give it to me, and yet they still insisted. It drove me up the wall. That I was finding my temper short already should be obvious. Should I record this morning in the book Alanis gave you? Maris asked, breaking into my thoughts. I wanted to screech and throw things. Another reminder, another thing to feed my rage. If you would. I would hate to disappoint Alanis, I ground out. Alanis was very concerned about my morning sickness. And my eating. And my drinking. She seemed to be under the impression that if I was left to my own devices I'd wither away and die. So she'd recruited my ladies to record everything I ate and expelled so that she could keep a better track of my health. Oh, how I hated the fact that I'd been wrapped in cotton wool from the moment Girardis had happily announced I was expecting. The crown princess could not be given any chance to harm herself. So now I'm stuck twiddling my thumbs all day instead of ruling, like I was supposed to be. Rhea arrived soon after and Maris took the opportunity to flee my obvious ire. I felt childish in one moment and ready to storm Viserys on his damnable throne and demand he remove the restrictions on me in the next. Doing so would be a terrible idea, of course, I didn't have to be a psychic to know that. How are you this morning? She asked, dropping into a chair by the fire grate. I sat opposite her and took a few deep breaths. Raging at Rhea would earn me nothing, she was genuinely supportive, genuinely interested in me and not just the babe. Well enough, I said after I'd gotten my temper under control. Tired. I had Maris up in the night. How are you? Getting to know the court. Lord Gerald outdid himself here, he has left quite the role for me to fill, she said cheerfully. Have no fear, even in your absence and Lady Jane's irritation the Vale Lords are busily working with your blacks. How annoyed is Jane? I finally brought myself to ask. Rhea chuckled. When I left she was allowing your name in conversation again. I winced. I do wonder what you did to prickle her so. I suggested she might start seriously looking into marrying, I mumbled finally under Rhea's hazel-eyed look. The Lady of Runestone just sighed in response. I would have thought you would know better. She was due to marry my brother once. She's your age, Rhaenyra. My brother was older than I. I winced again. He tried several times to bring her to the September as a child. Imagine that. My brother was 22 and she just 6 the first time he tried it. It was only the Queen's intervention that prevented it the first time. I swallowed the bile that entered my throat at that knowledge. Every time Hubert came up in conversation, I wanted to go back in time and punch him in the throat just a little bit more. I only realized I'd said that out loud when Rhea threw her head back and laughed. Oh. Indeed, you and every other lord in the Vale. Had he not died alongside Willem, his power would have been stripped from him eventually. At my quizzical look she gave me a small smile. Willem was my brother. His father's son. It makes me happy both would be horrified that I ascended after them. He would not have been a kind husband to Jane, I fear. He would not have understood her friendship with Jessamine. Her voice was soft at that. I have become rather fond of Jane these past few months. I must thank you for that. I had thought we would remain estranged until one of us died. I smiled, despite myself. Rhea had adopted yet another young woman. No doubt Jane was thrilled by that. Speaking of terrible marriages that are the fault of your father, what are you going to do about Daemon? I asked, changing the subject. I wondered when you'd bring that up. Do you know why I never sought an annulment? She asked, cutting me off. Bemused, I shook my head. Because it hurts him so much more than me to be married to his bronze bitch. I wear that name like a badge of pride because it is a testament to how much it pains him to be bound to me. But he is not bound to you anymore. He is king of the stepstones. All he needs to do is make polygamy legal and find a suitably drunken septon, I reasoned. That is very true. You wish for me to push an annulment now? Spite him with what he prized most now that it is useless to him. I could tell by the way her eyes were sparkling I'd appealed to her spiteful side. I would support you in it, I told her. She smiled happily, eyes going distant for a moment. You could be free of him. Take a man of your choice. One last bit of spite for Lord Hubert. An heir for Runestone that isn't that fathead Gunthor. An heir without that infernal princeling's blood like my father so hoped. An heir I did not have to sacrifice my dignity to obtain. I must have looked puzzled at that because she shook her head. It is not a tale for young ears such as yourself. All right, I will assume another unforgivable crime on Damon's part. She smiled again. Not even the past horror of his actions could dim the hope I was beginning to see in her now. Yes. Support my annulment before Viserys and I shall support you to Jane. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye.